Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed of Masechta Pesachim, Daf 30. Chevre, I must say, it's a nice daf. The daf begins with just kind of wrapping up. We have Rava comes to give the final stamp on our discussion from the end of the daf yesterday about mixtures. Pots after Pesach. If you're Rav, then you have to throw away your pots every Pesach. Well, L'maisa, we just sell our chametz, so it's probably less of an issue. But do you have to throw away all your pots every Pesach and buy new ones? Kashering items, very interesting. Can you kasher something? If there's, let's say, I guess in our case, if there's chametz in like a knife, can you get the chametz out? And absorbing, how to absorb usher things. So, that's just enough, I guess, to whet our appetites, and we'll get into more detail as we proceed. Let us begin on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph, all the way at the top, Amar Rava. So says Rava, to kind of wrap up our discussion from yesterday. Hilchasa, the halacha is, Chometz bizmano, ben b'mino, ben shelo, b'mino, aser, b'mashu, kirav, shelo bizmano, ben b'mino, ben shelo, b'mino, mutter, krib shimin, period. Let's read it again. So says Rava, Hilchasa, that the halacha is, that chometz, when it comes to chometz, bizmano, on Pesach, ben b'mino, ben shelo b'mino, aser, b'mashu, kirav. Okay? So if you have a mixture of chametz and matzah, right? Chametz and non-chametz, right? Okay, you have chametz falls into some kind of a mixture on Pesach. So, and we're just talking about a mashu, just a very little bit of chametz falls in. So, says Rava, whether we're talking about chametz that fell into a mixture of like items, or whether chametz fell into a mixture of unlike items, it will be aser. Right, this is what Rava is saying, and it's kirav. It's like Rav's opinion, and that was Rav's opinion yesterday, that we make a gezerah, right, that even though in general Rav and Shmuel say that when it comes to forbidden mixtures, if it's a mashu, if it's just a little bit, so then bimino it'll be aser, shelo bimino it would be mutter. However, Rav is concerned on Pesach that since eating chametz is an isser kares, so he says, you know what, even if a little bit of chametz falls into shelo b'mino, into a different, a mixture of different items, nonetheless it would be usher to eat, as out of concern for if that chametz were to fall into a mixture of similar items, you would not be allowed to eat it. So to prevent any confusion, any mixtures of chametz are not allowed on Pesach. So Rava paskins like that. Rava paskins like Rav regarding that. However, shelo bizmano, after Pesach, when we're talking about chametz she'aver all of a Pesach, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, mutter, krib shimin. Now, if we're talking about chametz she'aver all of a Pesach, right, we're talking about chametz after Pesach. So then if it falls, so meaning chametz that belonged to a yid during Pesach, and then now it's after Pesach, and it falls into some kind of a mixture. So says Rava that whether it falls into similar items, whether it falls into dissimilar items, it's going to be mutter. Like Reb Shimon, who says that the isser, the lav, the prohibition of eating chametz is limited midoraisa only to the 7 days of Pesach, before Pesach, and chametz she'aver all of a Pesach would be mutter midoraisa, and therefore any mixtures of wow, my basketball friend is playing basketball. I thought since it was cold and rainy he wouldn't be playing, but anyways, and therefore any mixtures, since chametz meikar adin is mutter mida oraisa after Pesach, so therefore any mixtures would be permitted. Alright, I switched locations. I couldn't focus with that basketball friend. Alright, so let's pick up where we left off. So Rava just said that when it comes to after Pesach, so then chametz, any kind of ta'arovis, any kind of mixture would be permitted, because we hold like Reb Shimon, who says that chametz after Pesach, chametz shavar lava Pesach, is mutter midoraisa. But now the question is, would Rava really say this? Reb Shimon knasa kanis. But Rava said that Reb Shimon made a fine, right? So even though midoraisa chametz shavar lava Pesach is mutter, but Reb Shimon said nonetheless you're not allowed to eat it, because since this yid was over on Bayirah by Yimatzeh, so therefore you're not allowed to eat this chametz anyway. So if that's the case, so then why should it be permitted? So hov over right, hov over olav b'bayil Yirah by Yimatzeh. So the Gemara answers hanimile be'enei avali de tarovis lo. Oh, so the Gemara says that there is a difference, that when Rava said that even though mida oraisa you're allowed to eat the chametz, but the Chacham said not to, because this yid was over in Bayirah by Yimatzeh, so that is only to eat it plain, to eat it straight. But if you're going to have a mixture, then chametz shavar lava Pesach would be permitted, whether it's b'mino, whether it's she'eno b'mino, if it's b'mashu. Was the Rava the timing? And Rava goes according to his reasoning to Amar Rava. The Rava said Kavino be Rav Nachman, that when we were by Rav Nachman Kavu Nafke Shivayomi the Pischa, once Pesach ended, Amar Lan Poku Zabinu Chamira Divnei Chela, he would say go and buy some chametz from the non-Jews. So we see that Rava is consistent, and he holds like Reb Shimon, and that is why he was saying that when they were by Rav Nachman, so immediately when Pesach was over, Rav Nachman would say, hey, go buy some pizza from the non-kosher pizza, because it's chametz shavar lava Pesach of a non-Jew, and it's mutter. Just kidding, he probably wasn't eating the non-kosher pizza, but he said go get some chametz epis from the non-Jews, because it's chametz shavar lava Pesach of the non-Jews is okay. Like Reb Shimon. Amar Rav says Rav Kaderis b'Pesach Yishaberu. Interesting. So Rav says that when it comes to pots, what do you do with your pots when it comes to Pesach? Do you have to throw them in the garbage? Your pots that you cook chametz in, do you have to throw them in the garbage? According to Rav, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do, because obviously you're not going to be allowed to use them on Pesach, right? Because you're going to get some of the, right? You're going to get, if you use the chametz pots, so then some of the flavor is going to get into the, right? It's going to get a little bit. Right, at least a little bit of the chametz is going to get into the food, and it'll be a tarovis, and we know that that's not going to be okay. But even after Pesach, Rab also says that chametz is not okay after Pesach either. Chametz shavar lava Pesach. So, but therefore, basically, comes Pesach, you got to throw away your pots because they have chametz absorbed into them. There's not going to, you can't use them on Pesach. You can't use them after Pesach. Ve'amai, but 1 second, why not? Why can't you use them after Pesach? L'shayinu achar Pesach. Leave the pots until after Pesach, and then use those pots just for cooking she'eno b'mino, right? She'eno mino kind of things, right? Because after Pesach, after all, Rav says that chametz shavar lava Pesach just becomes like a regular mixture. What's the halachos of a regular mixture? Well, when it's just a tiny amount, such as whatever chametz could have been absorbed in this pot, well, it's only a problem if it is b'mino, but if it's b'she'eno mino, it's acceptable. So why don't you leave over the pot until after Pesach? It'll be chametz shavar lava Pesach absorbed into the walls of the pot, and when you cook with it, so maybe a mashu of chametz will get into the mixture, and if it's she'eno mino, then it'll be permitted. So the Gemara answers, well, it's risky. Because what happens if then you end up cooking a mixture of mino in there, and then it'll be a problem. So therefore, just avoid the thing, throw out the pots, and that's that. Ushmuel Amr, Shmuel said, Lo yishaberu. Lo yishabru. Shmuel says you don't have to break your pots. You don't have to break your pots every year when it comes Pesach. Avamashi lula achar zmanu. Wait until after Pesach, and it'll be chametz shavar lava Pesach. Ve'avdbu bein b'mino bein shelo b'mino, and then you could use it for mixtures, whether it's b'mino, whether it's b'she'eno mino. It doesn't really matter, because according to Shmuel, chametz shavar lava Pesach is mutter b'taroves, like Reb Shimon. But the Shmuel L'taime, Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. The Amar Shmuel, Lanu Dimzabne Kande. Shmuel said to the people who sell pots, Ashvu Zabine Akandiche, make sure you're being fair with the price of pots. V'ilo, and if you're not fair with the price of pots, Dashinu L'chuk Rib Shimon, I'm going to paskin like Rib Shimon and say that Chametz She'avar Lav Pesach is mutter, and b'tarovis it's mutter, and people are not going to have to throw out their pots anymore when it comes Pesach, and then they're not going to have to buy new ones. So therefore, make sure to keep your prices fair, otherwise you're going to lose your monopoly. To which the Gemara asks, well, why doesn't Shmuel just paskin like Reb Shimon anyways? Because after all, he does hold like Reb Shimon. So the Gemara answers, Asri d'Rav Hava. Aha. My answer is, well, that's true, but he was in the town, he was in an area, a district, as we've seen this a number of times together, right? That somebody was in a different place of somebody else, right? Specifically, actually, when it comes to Rav and Shmuel, I think, right? We also had a story in Masechta, we had a few stories like this, but we had a story in Masechta Eruvin also that had to do with like a broken wall, and Rav was davka, didn't want to say anything because it was a place where Shmuel was. We saw it also in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Yud Tes, I think, regarding, I think it was Rav Hamnuna, and he was in a place, it was Chaysa the Argaz, and he was something to do with Asri de Rav also. Something to do with Muksa, I think. Anyway, so Shmuel didn't want to paskin like Reb Shimon because it was a place, it was in Rav's jurisdiction, and therefore, and Rav holds like Reb Yehuda regarding Chametz She'avar Lav Pesach. Okay, fine. Tichaya. There was a certain oven that in the oven there was some they put some fats, some meat fats on the floor of the oven, so that I guess I don't know, maybe then some of the fat will cook into the breads and it'll be real geschmack. Also Rava bar Ahilai lemech lerifta afilu b'milcha leolam. And Rava bar Ahilai said, you are not allowed to eat any breads that come out of this fleishik's oven forever. There's nothing you can do. You can't even do anything to get this like fat flavor out of the oven. Forget it. You can't eat any bread from this oven. Afilu b'milcha. Even with just simply putting salt on it. Forget about butter or anything. Even salt. Lest you come to eat any bread with some kind of a yogurt, some kind of a dairy dip. Interesting. So therefore, don't cook bread in some kind of a fleishik's oven. Interesting. Meisvei, we have a contradiction. In Lashon Sa'isa b'chalav. This is super interesting. We do not need dough with milk. Ve'imlash, and if you did need the dough with milk, kol apas kula asura. The entire bread is forbidden, mipnei hergel avera, out of concern that maybe people are going to eat that bread, make a sandwich and put some meat in there, and therefore that will be a problem. So therefore, don't make dairy bread. It's super interesting, right? I think that the halacha is that bread is not allowed to be dairy, and if it is, it has to be very clearly marked, I believe. Super interesting. Keotzebo, and similarly, says the Brisa, in Tashin es atanu ba'aliyah, we do not, put like a fatty lamb tail in an oven, or like, I guess, line an oven with it. V'imtash kola paskula asura. And if you did kind of put like this fatty stuff in the oven, so then the whole, all the breads that are made in that oven are going to be asura. But now here's the kicker. Here's the important part. Ad sheyasek is ataner. Until you burn out the oven. You have to burn out the oven. Once you burn out the oven, then you're allowed to bake bread in there, right? So if you kind of put this fat in the oven, so then any bread that you bake in there is going to be problematic until you burn out the oven. So what do we see? Hahusa katana miyashari. But if you burn out the oven, then it'll be permitted. Tiyufta de Rav bar Ahilai tiyufta. So this is a big problem for Rav bar Ahilai. Because Rav bar Ahilai said that if you put some of this fat in the oven, that's it. You're in trouble. There's nothing you can do. You can't bake any bread in that oven. Any bread that you bake in the oven is going to be forbidden forever. And yet over here we seem to be saying that it'll be forbidden until you burn it out, until you heat up the oven really hot. But once you do that, then it'll be permitted. So it's a kasha on Rava bar Ahiloi. Amalei Ravina Ravashi says Ravina to Ravashi v'chimiyachad itosiv Rava bar Ahiloi. Now that we basically said that Rava bar Ahiloi is incorrect, i.e., in that you can burn out an oven, so my kama Rav, then how come Rav said Kideros b'Pesach yishaberu? How come Rav said that you have to break the pots on Pesach? Why not just heat them up? So Ravashi responded, well, when Rav says that you have to break the pots, those are pots of earthenware. And when we said that you can heat up the oven, it's an oven of metal. So metal you can heat up in order to remove the fats from it, but the chametz you would be unable to heat up in the earthenware pots. Or if you want to say hava b'shalcheres, or you could say that actually both the oven and the pots were earthenware. Well, then what's the difference? How come you can heat up the oven but not the pot? Very interesting. That both the oven and the pot, you're going to be putting the food inside of it, right? But the difference is that the oven, you're also putting the fire inside of it, right? So an oven, you heat it up with the fire on the inside, which is also where the food goes. And since it heats up the oven super duper hot, well then, you're basically heating up the oven super duper hot, and then the next time you put food in there, well, you basically already burnt out any place that's coming in contact with the food. Whereas a pot, the fire goes on the outside of the pot, so the pot might get really hot on the outside, but at the end of the day, the food that's interacting with the pot is interacting with the inside of the pot, and that didn't get super duper hot, from directly with the fire. So then why don't you say, okay, so take a pot, and instead of throwing it in the garbage, just put it on a fire, but flip it over. And then the fire will be inside the pot, and it'll get super duper hot, and get rid of whatever chametz you need. So the Gemara answers, well, that's not going to work because you're going to get nervous that the pot's going to break if you flip it over and heat it up from the inside. And therefore, you're going to end up saying, you know what, why do I need to heat it up from the inside? I can just heat it up from the outside, but you can't. That's going to be a problem. Hilkach, therefore, I buchya. Therefore, this kind of I guess there was some kind of roof tile that they would also maybe sometimes heat things up on. And they said, look, since you generally, the heat source is from the outside of this tile, so then so you can't use it if it got chametz on it or something like that. But if you fill it up with coals and you're burning it out from the inside, then it would be okay. Ravashi says, what do you do about knives? What do you do about knives, right? You take knives and you use them all year long for chametz. What do you do comes Pesach time? And he says, look, I always buy new knives every Pesach. So Ravina said to Ravashi, he says, look, thank God you're a wealthy man, Ravashi. You can afford to buy new knives every single Pesach. But what about for people who can't afford to buy new knives every single Pesach? What do you do if you can't afford that? He says, no, I don't actually buy new knives every single Pesach. I make like new. Katayu batina. What I do is I take the wooden handles and I cover them in clay. Ufarzilayu benura. And then I take the blade, which is iron, and I put that in fire, meaning I protect the wooden handle and then put the blade in fire and remove any chametz that way. And then I put the handle in boiling hot water and remove any chametz that may have been absorbed in the handle that way. The halacha is idi v'idi b'roschin uv'chli rishon, and the halacha is you don't have to do that whole clay bit, and you just take the knife handle and everything, chuck it into really hot water, and that will get rid of any chametz from the entire knife. Amr Rav Huna breder of Yoshua eats perur magilo b'roschin. If you have some kind of a wooden spoon, so just chuck it into boiling hot water v'chli rishon. It has to be in a kli rishon. Kasav kavolo kach polto, because he holds that the way that it gets absorbed, that's how it gets spit out. What's a kli rishon? We learned about it at Shtickle Masechta Shabbos. Kli rishon is basically the boiling water, meaning as opposed to then if you pour out the boiling water into a different pot or something, that would not be okay. But if you heat up the water in a pot and it's boiling hot on the fire, so just chuck the chuck this wooden spoon in there, whatever, and then any chametz will be spit out from it. As it says, kivolo kachpolto, the way it's absorbed, that is the way it's spit out, right? So if the chametz was absorbed into the spoon in heat, so then just throw it in some hot water and it will be removed that way. Ba'omine mimuremar. So the Gemara says ameimar, but the Agos Abach says meremar. So we'll go with that. They ask meremar hanimani de kunya. Interesting. So if you have some kind of a vessel, it's made out of earthenware, and then it is plated with lead. So what are the implications in terms of Pesach? Yeruka lo tibaylach. Okay, don't ask about the earthenware that's like green earthenware. Divade asire, because certainly they are forbidden. Kitibaylach, what you have to ask is ukame v'chivare, if they are black or they are white, right? Because the green earthenware, I guess, was a much like a weaker earthenware, and therefore, if any chametz got absorbed through the lead and went into the earthenware part, so then it would get absorbed. But the white earthenware or the black earthenware, I guess, was a tougher kind of earthenware, and maybe if any chametz may have gotten absorbed through the lead, maybe it wouldn't have necessarily been absorbed in the black and white earthenware. So what's the halacha? And obviously we're not asking about a situation where there are cracks in the lead, because if there are cracks in the lead, well then it will get into the earthenware no matter what. Certainly that's not allowed. I'm talking about where there's smooth lead surrounding the entire earthenware surface, so there's no exposed earthenware. So are we able to, let's say, just like throw this into hot water or something, or would that not work? Amrle. So Meramer said, Chazina lehu dimidaise ama baloi va'asire. He says, look, well, if you take let's say hot water or something like that, and you put it in this kli, so you'll see that actually the outside of it also starts sweating a shtickle, in which case we see that the water somehow goes through the cup, I guess. And therefore, the earthenware that's inside is going to be absorbing whatever the contents of that vessel are. My time, how come? Interesting that the Torah says that earthenware is not released from its state forever. Right? So therefore we're concerned that if some of the chametz gets through the lead and it's absorbed in the earthenware, well, there'll be no way to release it, which is super interesting. Now, we had said earlier that you can have an earthenware oven and then just heat it up real good, and then it will release whatever fats were in it or something. Now, it could be, I don't know, but I'm speculating, it could be that there is a difference between getting it super duper hot with direct heat as opposed to hot water. So it could be that we're talking about hot water here, taking, this kli and putting it in hot water, or even putting the lead, heating that up with fire or something. But we're talking about the earthenware that's covered in lead. That might be different. But we're saying the Torah says that that it doesn't leave its sort of state forever. But maybe that's with basic heat, maybe with hot water or something. But maybe if you get super duper hot with intense heat, maybe that's a different story. I'm not sure. Then the Gemara asks, "So now, why is chametz any different than yenesech? How come we're saying over here that if you have this kli that's lead on the outside and earthenware on the inside, and so we're saying that if some of the they were saying that some of the chametz is going to be absorbed into the earthenware, and therefore this kli is not going to be allowed. But when it comes to yenesech is wine that may have been used for avodah zarah. So we say that if you have mani de kunya, if you have these same lead-plated earthenware vessels, ben uchama, ben chivari, ben yeruke, whether the earthenware is white, whether it's black, whether it's white, whether it's green, shari, you're allowed to use them. And if you can say, well, hold your horses. Chametz is deoraisa, therefore we're machmir, whereas ye nesech is midirabanan, therefore we're not so machmir. But but one second, we have a principle that any gezer derabanans, they make them in the same way as though they were deoraisa. And therefore, if by the D'oraisa we're going to say that it's asur, so by the D'rabbanan we should treat it the same way and say it's asur. So Merimar says, very interesting. There's a nafkamina over here. The kalim that we're talking about in the context of chametz is kalim that you use when they're hot, and therefore they absorb the chametz. Whereas the yenesech, you're not drinking the hot wine. What's the hot wine called? Some kind of a wine. I think I once tried to remember it also. And I don't remember if I remembered what it's called. And maybe somebody actually told us in WhatsApp what it's called. Some kind of a wine that you like heat up. I think I pointed out that I don't love it so much usually, but some kind of heat up wine that you drink like on cold, rainy days in Jerusalem. Amar Rava says Rava bar Abba Amar Chia bar Ashi Amar Shmuel Kol hakelim shenishtamshu bohen chometz bitzonin mishtamish bohen matzah chutz. Okay, so kol hakelim shenishtamshu bohen chometz bitzonin. So any vessels that you can use that are used for chametz, but they're cold. They're generally used cold for chametz. So mishtamish bohen matzah. So you can use them on Pesach. Chutz min beis seor. The exception being a place where you generally hold leaven, right? If you have, some kli that you, like sourdough starter. Like if you have some kind of vessel that you keep your sourdough starter in there, well, even though it's cold, that's don't use that vessel on Pesach. Hol shechimutzo kasha, since that's like a very strong chametz. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi ves charoses kves seor shechimutzo kasha dami, and says Rav Ashi that a vessel that you put that you store like a dip in, like a very vinegary dip. There's vinegar and like flour, so that also don't use that on Pesach. Don't use that vessel on Pesach also because the chametz that was in there was very strong. Rava says, Rava ani agone de mechoza, these big vats that they had in mechoza hall, v'tadira lemelish buchamira, since they often need leaven, need chametz in there, umashu bachamira, and they leave the sourdough in there, the starter in there, kives seor shechimutzo kashadami, it's like this sourdough container, that this starter container, which is very strong chametz. So pshita, we say that's obvious. Yeah, if you're keeping like this starter in there, obviously, right? We said that that's going to be a strong chametz. Ma'odetema, I may have thought to say, even the revicha shalit bu avira v'lo balae kamash malan. I may have thought to say that since these vats are very big, and maybe a lot of air can get in, maybe the chametz won't be as strong as we think. No, kamash malan, that even so, the chametz is strong. And you should not use these vats or these vessels on Pesach. That was Daf Lamed. I think it was a pretty good Daf. I was a little distracted by the basketball playing, but I think it worked out okay mostly in the end. So, at the beginning, we concluded our discussion about chametz mixtures. We had Rava, who kind of like gave the final stamp there, and he says, on Pesach, so then these mixtures of a mashahu of chametz, whether it's b'mino, whether it's b'she'eno mino, is going to be not allowed, like Rava says, after Pesach. So then it is going to be mutter, bein b'mino, bein b'she'eno mino, and that's like Reb Shimon. What about the fact that Reb Shimon says that actually chametz sha'avar of Pesach you shouldn't use because the person was over of bal yirah bal yimatzeh. That's only straight up chametz, but not in a mixture. Pots after Pesach, Rav says that they're not allowed. You have to destroy them, destroy the pots, because after Pesach you have a little, any little bit of chametz from before Pesach. Now after Pesach, whatever is absorbed in the pot will be chametz sha'avar alav Pesach, and will be aser b'mino, and even b'she'eno mino we make a gzera b'she'eno mino because of b'mino. Shmuel says, look, the halacha is like Reb Shimon, and chametz sha'avar alav Pesach is mutter, and therefore these pots after Pesach, even though there's chametz absorbed in them, would be okay, because we don't make a gzera when it comes to these mixtures. Kashering items, right? So we talked about like fat in ovens or chametz like knives. So if I understand, you can maybe kind of break it up into these kind of categories that we saw when it came to metal. So we saw taking like a metal knife and putting it in boiling hot water. We talked about maybe a metal oven that was exposed directly to fire. So it looks like metal you would be able to kasher either with direct heat or boiling water. Earthenware, so we said that earthenware, right, and yotzimide dofio la'olam, never is removed from its like status, but at the same time we did see that you would be able to sort of burn out an oven, and that would get rid of any like meat that was in there. So I don't know, it could be that maybe like intense direct fire could work with earthenware, though I can't say for sure. And wood, it looks like you can put wood in boiling water, which is very interesting. And then in terms of absorbing isser, so that there was an afkamina between yei nesech and chametz, right? Because we had the same kli that had earthenware in the middle and it was covered by lead. So we say that when it comes to chametz, it was not allowed because it was used when in heat, whereas the yei nesech is generally cold. I think it was called mulled wine, maybe, I think. So the mulled wine is hot, except for mulled wine, right? That would be hot. But in general, I guess the yei nesech is cold, or maybe the way that they used it in Avodah Zarah was cold, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily mess up the kli. Chevra, peace out.